Welcome to Navigating the Vortex, a deep dive, big picture analysis of contemporary geopolitics and geoeconomics. Today, Ukraine's coalition of allies needs to be more than willing, it needs to get ready. Russian provocations and Trump's latest pivot put yet more pressure on Europe. While the air and ground war in Ukraine is grinding on, Moscow is increasing pressure on Kyiv's Western allies. Russian drone incursions into Poland in the early hours of September 10 and Romania a few days later were followed by 3 Russian fighter jets breaching Estonian airspace on September 19. And there has been speculation that drones, which forced the temporary closure of Copenhagen and Oslo airports overnight on September 22, were connected to the Kremlin as well. While this might suggest a deliberate strategy of escalation on the part of the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, it is more likely an attempt to disguise the fact that the Kremlin's narrative of inevitable victory is beginning to look shakier than ever. A failed summer offensive that has been extremely costly in human lives is hardly something to write home about. Estimates of Russian combat deaths now stand at just under 220,000. What's more, this loss of life has produced little in territorial advances. Since the start of the full-scale invasion in February 2022, Russia gained some 70,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian land. While this means that Moscow has nearly tripled the amount of territory it illegally occupies, during its most recent summer offensive, it gained fewer than 2,000 square kilometers. On the 1st of September 2022, Russia controlled just over 20% of Ukrainian territory. 3 years later it was just 19%, up from 18.5% at the beginning of the year. Perhaps most telling that the Russian narrative of inevitable victory is hollow is the fact that Russian forces were unable to convert a supposed breakthrough around Pokrovsk in the Donbas area of Ukraine in August into any solid gains amid a successful Ukrainian counterattack. That Russia is not winning, however, is hardly of comfort to Ukraine. Moscow still has the ability to attack night after night, exposing weaknesses in Ukraine's air defense system and targeting critical infrastructure. The Western response, has been slow so far and has yet to send a clear signal to the Kremlin what NATO's and the EU's red lines are. While NATO swiftly launched Eastern Sentry in response to the Russian drone incursion into Poland, the operation's deterrent effect appears rather limited given subsequent Russian incursions into Romania and Estonia, as well as undeclared flights in neutral airspace near Poland and Germany. Subsequent comments by Donald Tusk, the Polish Prime Minister, threatened to shoot down flying objects when they violate our territory and fly over Poland, while cautioning that it was important to think twice before deciding on actions that could trigger a very acute phase of conflict. On the other side of the Atlantic, Donald Trump, the US President, in his latest missive opined that Kyiv can win all of Ukraine back in its original form. But he has generally said little about Russia ratcheting up pressure on NATO's eastern flank. Regarding the Russian drone incursion into Poland, he mused that it could have been a mistake, before pledging to defend NATO allies in the event of a Russian attack and encouraging allies on the eastern flank to shoot down Russian intruders. This is certainly an improvement on his earlier threats to NATO solidarity, but it is at best a backstop against a full-blown Russian escalation. What it is not is a decisive step to ending the war against Ukraine. In fact, any such US steps seem ever farther off the agenda. The deadline that Trump gave Putin after their Alaska summit to start direct peace talks with Ukraine came and went without anything happening. The US president's so-called Phase 2 sanctions on Russia and its enablers have now been conditioned by Trump on all NATO and G7 countries to impose such sanctions first. And the last line of his Ukraine can win post on his Truth Social platform, "Good luck to all," looks more like him completely abandoning his hitherto unsuccessful peacemaking efforts. Meanwhile, US arms sales to Europe, meant to be channeled to strengthen Ukraine's defenses, have been scaled down by the Pentagon to replenish its own arsenals. At the same time, a long-standing US support program for the Baltic states, the Baltic Security Initiative, is under threat from cuts and could be discontinued as of next year. As has been clear for some time, support for Ukraine, and ultimately the defense of Europe, is no longer a primary concern for the US under Trump. Yet, European efforts to step into the gaping hole in the continent's security left by US retrenchment are painfully slow. The defense budgets of the EU's 5 biggest military spenders, France, Germany, Poland, Italy, and the Netherlands, combined are less than a quarter of what the US spends annually. And even if money were not an issue, Europe has serious problems with its defense industrial base. The EU's flagship Security Action for Europe program has faced months of delays over the participation of non-EU members, including the UK and Canada, which have significant defense industrial capacity. European defense cooperation, including the flagship Future Combat Air System, is threatened by national quarrels, particularly between the EU's 2 largest defense players, France and Germany. Thus far, Muddling through has worked for Ukraine's Western allies, mostly because Kyiv has held the line against the Russian onslaught, making do with whatever the West provided while rapidly innovating its own defense sector. It has also worked because Trump has not, yet, completely abandoned his European allies, and there is enough life, or perhaps just enough ambiguity, left in NATO as a collective defense alliance to give Putin pause for thought. So far, the Russian president is merely testing boundaries, but if unchallenged, he might keep pushing further into uncharted territory and with unpredictable consequences. While Western's stopgap measures may be fine for now, Western responses to Putin's challenges, which are likely to become more frequent and more severe in the future, will require the European coalition of the willing to focus on the here and now and raise its level of preparedness. A big thank you to all of our readers, listeners, followers and subscribers. Signing up to the newsletter is the best way to make sure you don't miss out on anything, and you'll get our newsletter and podcast delivered straight to your inbox wherever you are in the world. Importantly, you'll also be able to read the full written version of all of our pieces, which gives all of the background links to the information we cite in case you want to dive deeper and, like us, like to look at primary sources and check your facts. You can register for free at navigatingthevortex.com. You can also subscribe for subscriber-only access to comments and chats and other special subscriber-only benefits. You can find all these details in the podcast show notes as well. We hope you'll share Navigating the Vortex with anyone you think might find it of interest. If you like the show, please consider rating and reviewing us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you are listening.